to begin by sharing with you the last section of a four-part Franciscan blessing. May God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you really can make a difference in this world, so that you are able, with God's grace, to do what others claim cannot be done. That's a nice prayer, isn't it? Can we be foolish enough to imagine that we can make a difference in this world? Can we be foolish enough to do what others claim cannot be done? I believe we can be that foolish. I believe we can change the world if we grasp the significance of this day, if we understand Easter. Last night we heard the story of the resurrection from Luke's gospel account. In that story, the women arrive at the tomb, find Jesus' body gone. In his place, they find two angels who tell them that Jesus is risen. They rush back to tell the men, and they repeat the strange announcement of the angels, but the men thought this was an idle tale, so they paid no attention to it. An idle tale. That's actually a very tame translation of the Greek word. The Greek word is leros. That's where we get our word delirious. So the men thought the women were delirious. They thought the women were crazy. They thought they were just foolish women. Now Peter, who was often known to be a bit foolish himself, did rush off to the tomb, peers in, and is amazed. Now, we're not told that Peter yet believes that Jesus is risen, but we do know that he is amazed, that he's filled with wonder. And perhaps that's a good start. You see, Peter had to have some kind of empirical evidence. He wasn't going to trust these delirious women. He had to go see for himself. He had to look in the tomb and see that he was gone. And then, only then, could he begin to wonder, to be filled with awe. So it is with most of us. We consider trust in empirical evidence as what separates the reasonable folks from the foolish and crazy ones. And maybe that's a good thing, most of the time. The problem is, empirical evidence is not the only source of knowledge available to us. There is at least one other form of knowledge, often referred to as tacit knowledge. And I'll give you a brief definition of that phrase, that term, tacit knowledge. It is the unwritten, unspoken, and hidden vast storehouse of knowledge held by practically every normal human being, based on his or her emotions, experiences, insights, intuition, observations, and internalized information. Emotions, insights, and intuitions. That kind of knowledge is downplayed today. It's considered foolish by most folks. Yet I'd suggest that it is the source of most of the knowledge that we use on a day-to-day basis. Now one of the problems with this kind of knowledge is that it's difficult, if not impossible, to try to communicate it to someone else. For instance, trying to explain to someone how to ride a bicycle. It's really almost impossible to do. You have to just do it. You have to have an experience to know. However, the medium that comes closest to dancing at least near the truth of tacit knowledge is storytelling. A good story can express our emotions, our intuitions, our internalized information in ways that we can recognize even if we can't explain it to somebody else. Now, stories are my passion. They always have been. When I was 3 and 4 years old, living with my grandparents, I used to wait until they went to bed so I could turn the TV back on and watch old movies. And for years, I didn't think that they knew I was doing it until I gave myself away at dinner one night when I raised my glass of milk to my grandmother and said, "Here's to you, kid." My secret was given away. To this day, a new film or a good novel are my greatest pleasures. Call me a fool, call me crazy, but I thrive on tacit knowledge. And I think this is the way that we have to approach the resurrection. Not looking for empirical evidence, but instead looking around the edges of the story, seeking to know by intuition, seeking to know by internalized information. Were these women delirious? Or had they experienced something that touched them deeply in their hearts? Now let's look at this morning's gospel, the account from John, and try to look around the edges of that version of the story. Mary is identified in Luke as one of those delirious women who ran back to tell the disciples that Jesus was gone from the tomb. In John's version, it's both Peter and John who run back to the tomb, look in, and find Jesus' body gone. Then they return home. Up to that point, John's version is pretty much the same as Luke's version. But then, John continues the story. After everyone is gone, Mary Magdalene is left alone outside the tomb, weeping. What we know about Mary Magdalene is that she was healed by Jesus, became one of his followers, and so presumably came to understand his message about the radical love of God. She witnessed the events of Good Friday. Jesus, who she deeply loved, was killed. And now she stands outside the womb, weeping because his body has been stolen. Mary is in deep grief. In the midst of this fragile emotional state, a man appears who she mistakes for the gardener. The gardener. Does that get your intuition going? Who was the original gardener? Who was the first man to be told by God that he would now forever have to work the ground to grow food? If you recall the story of the Garden of Eden, when Adam was forced by God out of the garden for his disobedience, his punishment was that he would forever have to toil to grow crops. So Mary believes she's looking at the gardener. And in a way she's right. Then the man speaks to her name, Mary. And in a flash, she knows this is her teacher, returned from the dead. She doesn't doubt this amazing thing for even a minute. In the midst of her deep grief, Jesus, the new Adam, stands before her. Now, was this a reasonable thing for her to believe? Not really. So was Mary delirious from grief? I don't think so. I think from deep within her, she found the truth. He is risen. Now, I'll tell you what I believe. I believe that the resurrection of Jesus Christ changed everything. As St. Paul put it, we have undergone the baptism into death, so that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, we too might walk in newness of life. We too might walk in newness of life. What does that mean? The old world is gone. Jesus is the new Adam, the new man. We're starting all over again. A new reality, a new world started with the resurrection. Heaven and earth have now been merged. We are a new creation. So if that's true, why is there still so much suffering and evil in the world? Well, some people are still trapped in slavery to sin and death. Some have yet to know the experience of the risen Christ. And just because part of humanity is not awake to this reality doesn't make it any less real. Why do I believe in the resurrection? Because of my personal experience. I know this is a new world in which death, our ancient enemy, has been cast down and trampled underfoot because of all the times of my life that God has pulled me from death into life. I know that God continues to transform this world because of the glory of God I see all around me in the beauty of creation. I know that Jesus still walks among us because of the unconditional love expressed to me from my wife, my children, and my grandchildren. And I know that my Redeemer lives because I see his face when I look into the faces of all of you. He is risen. Call me delirious, call me foolish, but that's what I believe. And I hope you do too. And now let us agree to work together to proclaim from the housetops this good news, that we might transform this world into the new creation God has always intended it to be. Alleluia, Christ is risen.
Lord is risen.